So my name is Bijan Nyakon, like Dijon mustard, but with a B. I'm a technical account manager on Altair's aerospace team based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, supporting customers like Lockheed, Gulfstream, Textron, and Safran in the Americas. Okay, and so originally the intention of today's demo was to cover just general geometry editing of, mostly surface-based geometry. However, my colleague did a pretty good presentation and demonstration over most of our geometry editing options and tools during his geometry import and cleanup demo a few weeks back. So for some of those basic understanding of some of those geometry editing tools, definitely recommend checking out that playlist that I link in the chat, and you can access that recording there. It's about a 30-minute demo. So today I instead want to mainly focus on geometry editing tips and tricks and capabilities for getting a nice mesh by associating your mesh in your geometry. So I'm going to start covering some of the more traditional aspects and ways in which you can edit your geometry to control your mesh associated to that geometry, mostly in the context of a 2D surface or shell mesh. And then I'll also give a tease to some of the upcoming capabilities that we're spending more and more time in enhancing that I think will drive the future of topology-based modeling for your simulation models. So some pretty cool stuff, and let's get started. We have a chat open. I probably won't see it during the demo, but we should have some time, at least 5 or so minutes at the end of the demo, to address any questions you guys have. All right, so with that out of the way, let me go ahead and open up HyperMesh 25. That'll be the version we're conducting these demos in going forward. So some of the tools may be slightly different between version 24, 23, 25, etc. But overall the interface is pretty similar between these versions. All right, so I'm going to open up this model here, and we're going to work on getting you guys access to these models that we use during these demos as well, if you want to follow along during some of these. So that'll be coming on our webpage soon. Okay. So like I said, I wanted to talk about how your mesh and your geometry are or can become connected, and then how you can control your mesh and your geometry, using that connection. So let's take, for example, this rib type part. It's already mid-surfaced. We're going to cover mid-surfacing in a future demo, so stay tuned for that. But I'm going to isolate this guy. So select it, hit I, F to fit. All right, so let's say I've already generated this mid-surface of this rib that I want to go ahead and mesh. So first, let me just quickly generate a mesh, which I have mapped to F12. And we'll cover mesh, just general meshing in more detail in a future demo as well. But I'm just going to hit F12, get to my freeform mesh, Control A to select all my surfaces, and then I'm just going to middle click to generate my mesh here. Okay. And so the first thing you'll notice, right, is my mesh is tied or associated to my geometry. So what do I mean by that? Attributes of the topology of my geometry will affect the topology of my mesh and the connectivity of my mesh and so on. So, right, so wherever I have defined edges in my geometry, that's where HyperMesh will generate element edges, right? And wherever I have these fixed points, and if you don't see fixed points, you can turn those on down here and hit these little points icon right here. And so wherever I have fixed points, right, I'll seed, or HyperMesh will seed nodes whenever I generate a mesh on that surface, right? So it's all intertwined here, and you can check the associativity pretty easily. A strategy I like to use is by using the entity selector. This is a pretty easy way to check. So basically what you might do is hit S to go to surfaces. So now I can select all of my surfaces. And then if I just change the entity selector to elements, or just hit E on the keyboard, hit E, because it's still selecting all of those elements based on that surface selection, that's at least my, personally, my quick and easy way to check that the elements that I generated are still associated to that mesh. And if you're ever in a scenario where you lose that associativity, or maybe you're bringing in your mesh and your geometry separately for whatever reason, you can reassociate that connection with the edit elements and associate. So, be forewarned, it's not 100% foolproof, but it does allow you to reestablish that association between your geometry and your mesh, which can be helpful for sure. Okay, so you may be thinking, all right, that's great. I get it. Mesh and geometry are connected, but what can you gain from that? And I think there's a lot of helpful aspects of this. So one, this allows you to edit your geometry in a way that'll control your mesh and will still be, basically traceable. If for whatever reason you lose your mesh, you'll still have those topology-based changes or additions that you made to your geometry that'll control that mesh. So like, for example, if you want to have like over here on this face, like a nice clean box, like a nice clean edge, you can go to Topology. I'll do split stitch, and I can just do split interactive here. So that's an easy one where you can just left click and drag to, like in this case, create an edge. So I can like left click, drag, create an edge, like maybe here. And you'll see it automatically updates my mesh by doing that, and my geometry. So because I have, and sorry, I may have skipped over this, but since I have my model view set to topology, I can see those edges from the geometry as I edit them, and so on. So makes it easy to see, okay, now I have a green edge denoting two surfaces with one shared edge. And as you see here, I'm seeding element edges along that geometry edge, right? So just makes it easy to control your mesh, kind of maybe portion off segments like here, like where you might want to have like a nice clean transition. Maybe I could redo that if I want, Control Z, maybe I can do something, over here. Okay. So yeah, so that makes it easy, just kind of define edges, section off portions where you want to have like a nice sort of quad mapping of your elements. And one thing that I'll note here is that the mesh won't necessarily update if you make a change to the geometry that that the mesh could still, I guess, deal with. So for example, if I didn't have this edge here, this geometric edge here, the mesh could still leave element edges there. It would have no reason not to. So you saw when I created this edge, it automatically updated the mesh. But if I say suppress that edge, it doesn't automatically update the mesh, because there's nothing about removing that edge that tells my mesh that it needs to update, or it won't work, right? So just a little FYI there, if you're wondering why suppressing an edge doesn't automatically update your mesh, that would be why. Ooh, what do I want here? Stitch. Well, unsuppress. If I hold shift with unsuppressed, that should give me my edge back. There we go. Okay. Another thing here, and this may be different depending on if you're in version 24 or 23, but we do have, of course, a washer tool that'll let you easily select some edges and define an offset to create washers around some holes. So yeah, like I said, in older versions, it may not be as easy to find. In versions, I believe 24.1, we added this in. Under the quick edit, we have this washer split option, right? So if I remember right, in 23, I believe it was under offsets, and you would change it to lines. If you ever have a hard time finding a certain tool like that, like especially washers, you can always just do Control F and search washer. And it should bring it up. Yeah, so before it was under topology offset. So now you can get to it, washer split under quick edit. And this makes it easy to go in, select some hole. Maybe we'll say an offset of 5, hit enter, blammo. And you can control how many layers how many rows of washers you can generate as well. So, right, so some folks may have certain standards for certain sized holes, where maybe, holes within a certain diameter range might need 2 rows of washers. And sometimes I've noticed here, you may just have to deselect. There we go. Deselect the edge and then reselect it again to get your different parameters to update those washer splits you're doing. So yeah, that makes it easy to make sure you have like a nice distributed layout of elements around a hole, which of course can be pretty important to capturing the stiffnesses and mechanical behavior around those holes. Okay, drink some water. And so just want to note another thing. If like, let me see if I delete all my elements here. So using this topology coloring mode that I'm in right now, this makes it easy to see also where you have breaks in your geometry, which again will control the connectivity of your mesh. So if, for instance, if I disconnect, if I do split, hold shift should let me detach that edge. Maybe. Let's see. Let me try split interactive. Yeah, split should be what I want. Okay, let me see. Let me try here. See. Oh, nope, that's not what I want. There we go. Okay. All right. So say for instance you have an edge like this that's red. So the green is denoting an edge that's sharing 2 surfaces, right? So connected to 2 surfaces. If you have yellow, that's a T-junction that we might call it, but that's just an edge that's sharing more than 2 surfaces, like 3, 4, whatever. And in those scenarios, you'll get mesh connectivity when you mesh those surfaces at those edges, right? But if you have a free edge like this, denoted by the red coloring, this is just showing me 2 red edges that are so close together, I can't even see it. But by denoting the red, that's a pretty clear way that you can check that connectivity, so that whenever you go to mesh, F12, Control A, middle click. So, right off the bat, it may look like you have connected mesh there, but if I increase the density of one of those edges, check it out, right? It's only increasing the density of one of the edges. So in cases like that, right, it may not be immediately clear, as you could see, that those meshes are disconnected there at that edge, but by associating that geometry to your mesh, it can make it easy to view the topology view of your geometry and then check the connectivity that way. Okay. Get rid of these guys and let me re-stitch that guy back together. Okay. All right. Couple more things here. Let's see. So another aspect, a couple more things that I wanted to show with regards to interactive editing of your geometry. So let me get my mesh back here. Bloop. Okay. So I showed how you can use this split interactive to just create an edge to edge, split in your mesh. But you can also use this to just seed nodes at certain points on a surface, on an edge, or wherever. So, if you have some location where you need a node, maybe to define some connection point or something like that, you can just come in here and just left click. And so you're seeing, and this is in reference to what I was mentioning earlier about how fixed points can control your mesh. So by adding fixed points to my surface, right, it's making sure the mesh is updating where it has to place nodes at those fixed point locations. So that could just be a nice way to control, where you have specific nodes on your surface mesh. And then to remove these, like most operations with HyperMesh, to undo or to do the opposite version, you would hold Shift. So if you hold Shift over any of these fixed points, I can left click, and you'll see, similar to how when I suppress the edge, if I just delete some fixed point, the mesh doesn't automatically update, right? Because it can still, there's nothing preventing that from working in this scenario. But then if I go and create another fixed point here, then yes, it will update the mesh, and it will no longer keep that node point seated at the previous fixed point I created. Bloop, bloop, bloop. So just an easy way to add fixed points in where you need them to control the node seating on your mesh. So another thing is you can also do that, like if you want to specify a bunch of fixed points to see nodes on an edge, you can use split. Make sure I'm using the right option here. Surface edges, yes, this is the one I want. So like for instance, if you, maybe we'll do this one, this edge here, since it's flat. So like if you want, I don't know, maybe 20 nodes along this edge, you can see 20 fixed points here, but of course it will depend still on your mesh size, however many nodes it puts on that edge. But you can do this to use a little more control, so like maybe like 50, something like that. And you'll see it automatically splits up my edge by 50 of those fixed points, and you'll see I'm getting nodes seated at all those points. And again, this is somewhat dependent on the element size. So if I used a much smaller element size, I could potentially get nodes in between each of those fixed points, right? So just something to be aware of. But this can be a nice, easy way to control that seating. And the benefit of this is, if I go in elements, delete all my elements, I still have those fixed points there on the geometry, so that if I go and regenerate a mesh, bloop, bloop, blam, I still get that same node seating. So helpful little tip there. Okay, so I think that just about covers some of the more traditional geometry editing and editing your geometry to control your mesh that I wanted to show. Let me also give a tease to a few other things. Let me bring my model back up fresh. Okay. Isolate and F. So something else I want to tease was this, and you may have noticed this, may have been curious about it if you're working in newer versions, is this FE geometry tool here that's under our topology ribbon now. So let me first generate a mesh again. F12, Control A, and middle click. This gives me my mesh. So the purpose of this FE topology tool / workflow is we're basically trying to bring together the more and more so this associativity between your geometry and your mesh. And so by doing this, we're basically molding together geometry and mesh into this sort of single entity that we call FE geometry. And by doing this, it allows us to simplify a lot of our tools for editing geometry specifically and for editing mesh specifically into tools that can edit both geometry and mesh together, which is why we've sort of rebranded this, what used to be the geometry ribbon, as the topology ribbon, as we're now sort of bringing these two together to, one, simplify our tools and allow us to more optimize our allocation of resources for development, but also just to simplify the user experience, just so you don't have to have an understanding of both the geometry editing tools and mesh editing tools. Let's see, so what do I mean by that in effect? So let's take this associated, this part, this 2D surface of some brackets, some rib, with my mesh associated to the surfaces. So if I grab Control A, grab all of my surfaces, middle click to convert, I now have FE geometry. So basically, as I make additions to the geometry or the mesh, it'll affect either or. So let's take, for instance, and just to highlight this, I'm going to turn back on this topology view. So I can see with the topology view, I can see the sort of bounds of my geometry, and then I can, of course, see the bounds of my mesh as well. So let's say, for instance, you had some hole. Bloop, delete. What do you notice? So you notice I just deleted some elements, right? But it's changing as I deleted those elements. It's updating my geometry as well, right? So like if I turn off my mesh, you'll see it has that same hole from the geometry change or from the mesh change I just made in the geometry. And so this can expand a lot of possibilities where you might use geometry cleanup tools to clean up your geometry. Now you can do that with your mesh. So for instance, like, this is a this is a pretty massive, obvious hole I just made in my mesh, right? But like if you have some maybe slight gaps in your mesh, maybe you have a massive system model with millions of elements, and maybe you're worried about small little holes like this, small little crevices in your mesh. Now using FE geometry, at least in this specific case, we can use the patch spline tool that Jason covered during his geometry cleanup demo to now find gaps in your mesh as well as your geometry. Okay, so then you can go through, arrow through, see all your different holes, and you say, that big hole's not supposed to be there. Let's get rid of that. So left click and blam, regenerates that mesh. So I think there's a lot of cool capabilities here. We're still working on updating all of our geometry editing based tools to also work with meshes, but we've got a decent amount of capabilities right now, like some of those surface patch tools and surface extend. And so that's why some of you may also be confused why in newer versions you generate hex meshes through the extrude tool under topology. And this is part of that reason, right? So just trying to bring together to sort of simplify the offering. So, if you want to extrude a 2D quad mesh into a hex mesh, you would go to the topology extrusion tool to edit that topology of your mesh. So that's some of the thought process there from our end. Another quick thing is it also makes it a lot easier to just see and verify mesh connectivity when you're using this FE geometry. So like if I detached a couple elements here, so if I just detached these elements from the rest of my mesh, middle click, blam, it's immediately obvious, right, that I have a discontinuity there in my mesh. And so there are ways you can check that with just a regular mesh, but it's a lot easier and a lot faster to catch those issues here in a case like this where you're using FE geometry. Okay, so that's FE geometry. Again, that's more so looking to the future. So I think in the future it'll be useful. But one other thing I wanted to cover, or at least just touch on real quick, is the batch mesher. So let me remove all my elements. Oh, I forgot I did FE geometry. So let me go back to where I just had my geometry. So one thing you may have noticed in newer versions is now our default, and I've changed this for my personal preference, but our default meshing option in newer versions is the batch mesher. There's various reasons that we have for this. I think I can get into, but it's basically part of our effort to enhance traceability of your FE models. So it allows you to go in, establish some parameters based on two different sets of parameters. One where you can specify criteria for element quality. So you can maybe have certain element size ranges for certain types of models or configurations and various different element quality checks that you can specify. But more so, you can specify parameters here in which you define how you mesh around certain geometric features. So you saw me create some washer splits to create a nice distribution of elements around a hole earlier. However, you can also do that with the parameter editor in the batch mesher so that the batch mesher does that automatically. So spoiler alert, I already measured those holes, so I know that each of those holes have a radius range of about 33 to 66. So I just did that using the measure tool, but so now I know that within that range, so from 30 to let's say 70. So that should pick up all of those holes in this case. And now I can say how I want to treat those holes. Maybe I can just remove and seed, like, remove the hole and just seed a node point there at that hole. But in this case, I want to do a washer. Just some amount more than 4. And we'll have it create that first washer automatically. And then if I wanted to have it create 2 washers for the holes within this radius range, I could specify that as well as automatic or some factor based on the radius. And so yeah, you can go through, specify like how many rows of elements you want through a fillet, all these sort of things. So it takes a bit of upfront time to define all of these, but the idea is you would specify all of these parameters for each of your different configurations you may have. Like, maybe you have one set of parameter files for spars, another one for ribs, another one for skins, etc. And allows you to, control that geometry-based meshing more automatically, which then in turn will help with traceability of your mesh as well. Okay, so yeah, so just all I didn't get too crazy with it. All I did was just change some of the preferences for creating washers around holes. So if I select my surfaces, middle click, and there we go. Now, right off the bat, so you'll see it's not editing my geometry, but it's just generating right off the bat a mesh that's basically meshing around the geometry in a way that I would have if I was just editing the geometry directly, right? So again, more upfront work, but ideally, if you create these sets of parameters for all of your different systems and subsystems and parts and etc., then you can, have basically mesh flags, and we'll get into this during our mesh representations demo in the future. But it's very easy to then automatically map in and automate the application of these meshing parameters to each of your parts and systems and subsystems. So some cool stuff to look forward to for that. I'm excited to share some of that information with you guys in the coming weeks. But yeah, that was about all I had for today's demo. Apologize for running up on time here. If you have any questions, yeah, we got about a minute here. But if you think of any other questions later, you can feel free to use that survey link on the website for this webinar series. Feel free to use that link to just submit general questions, maybe like about the previous demo that you saw, for example. So yeah, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions. Again, we'll be uploading these recordings to the YouTube playlist that I linked to. Just give us a few days or so of delay to get it uploaded. But yeah, otherwise, again, we're doing our next demo exactly a week from today over, I believe it's mid-surfacing. Mid-surfacing, yes. So definitely some helpful stuff coming next week if you're interested. But yeah, otherwise, I'll let you guys go about the rest of your day. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Hope this is helpful. If not, let us know on the survey. But yeah, hope you guys all have a lovely rest of your day.